your own head is what his corner's now saying. Chuck Liddell is to try to neutralize this attempted choke.
Side choke going here. Key here is to relax and turn to the elbow. Keep some space.
And size and time were on the side right there of Chuck Liddell because he knew that he had to withstand the pressure of that attempted choke
And that's
for
it.
only a little while. Nope, it's over.
Looks as though John's going to stop it here.
Mixed martial arts is a sport unlike any other. A sport whose high-stakes action creates storylines that are uniquely compelling and incomparable to anything else in the entertainment industry. From those who can snatch victory from the clutches of defeat, to masters of the striking discipline, whose legacy-defining knockouts captivate a generation. My goal as an avid fan of MMA is to shed light on some of the legacies left behind by those who fought against the grain and did their part to frontier MMA into the limelight. Today's video will be on MMA great Jeremy Horn. Horn is an accomplished mixed martial artist who is a staple fighter of the world-renowned training camp known as the Miletich Fighting Systems Gym, a gym who dominated the late 90s and early 2000s, housing all-time MMA greats such as Matt Hughes, former UFC welterweight champion and UFC Hall of Famer, and Robbie Lawler, holder of perhaps the most violent run of title fights in UFC history and inductee to the UFC Hall of Fame Fight Wing. Miletich Fighting System was created and led by former UFC welterweight champion and current UFC Hall of Famer, Pat Miletich. Founded in the year 1997, over its lifespan, those who trained under the Miletich Fighting System banner would go on to hold 5 UFC championships, 1 Invicta FC championship, 1 Elite XC championship, 3 memberships in the UFC Hall of Fame Pioneer Wing, and 2 fights in the UFC Hall of Fame Fight Wing. Amongst the prestigious fighters who competed under the Miletich Fighting System's banner, we have Jeremy Horn. Horn is an instrumental cog in the legacy of not just the Miletich Fighting Systems, but of MMA as a whole. Originally from Omaha, Nebraska, Horn is a mixed martial arts pioneer thanks to his work in MMA organizations such as the UFC, King of the Cage, Pride FC, and the WEC. Over the course of his 24-year pro career, Horn racked up a staggering 120 fights with an impressive 92 wins. Some of those wins coming over the likes of UFC superstars Chuck Liddell, Forrest Griffin, and Chael Sonnen. Horn's fighting style was ground-oriented with a strong skill in submission locks. He possessed technique that could be considered in a lot of regards as ahead of its time and was often the smaller fighter. Horn used ground fighting techniques developed under the Miletich Fighting System to out-leverage and outwork some of the best fighters of his generation, racking up an impressive 54 total submissions in his MMA career. Horn was a staple amongst the generation of fighters who fought in the late 90s and early 2000s, and is an undeniable piece of the story when it comes to the history of mixed martial arts. Horn's career began in the 1990s, making his pro debut in the year 1996. Over the 4-year gap that preceded the 2000s, Horn racked up an outstanding 46 fights with 37 wins, 5 defeats, and 4 draws. Over the course of the 90s, Horn would go on a 22-fight unbeaten streak, debuting in organizations such as the UFC and Pancrase. Throughout this 4-year period, Horn would fight at an unprecedented rate with an average of 11.5 fights a year. It's important to note that around 2/3 of those fights happened in the year of 1999, a year in which Horn held a record of 19-1. Horn finished the decade out with 34 finishes, with 23 of them coming from submission locks. It took Horn 9 fights before he was faced with his first test against the elite competition of his time, in a fight against UFC Hall of Famer Dan Severn. Despite the level of talent of both fighters, this fight would take place on the regional circuit, a common occurrence in the early days of MMA. Here we had two world-class fighters putting it all on the line to create history in the local community center of a small city, Council Bluffs, Iowa. Severn, a career heavyweight who was no stranger to no-holds-barred fighting, held an officially verified record of 15 wins, 3 losses, and 1 draw at the time of this contest. In Horn fights, Horn was the notably smaller fighter, a disadvantage in a match where both athletes were ground fighting specialists. Still, undeterred by Severn's size advantage or grappling pedigree, Horn was actually the one who attempted to take the fight to the ground first. Unfortunately for Horn, and as many of you who are familiar with the legend that is Dan the Beast Severn could predict, Severn's size and grappling pedigree would allow him to spend the majority of the bout utilizing his relentless top pressure to lay atop Horn. The fight's conclusion will be brought on due to allotted time constraints, and the result would be deemed a draw as there was no finish in the bout. This fight, although not particularly entertaining, was something when coupled with 2 draws against Travis Fulton, an MMA legend in his own right, worked to earn Horn some notoriety amongst the mixed martial arts world of the late 90s. This notoriety culminated in an opportunity to fight the great Frank Shamrock in a UFC light heavyweight title fight. Just 4 fights removed from his bout with Severn, Horn's battle with Frank Shamrock was a back-and-forth fight in which Horn held an early advantage holding top control. Top control Horn achieved by dumping Shamrock to the ground with a single leg slam. Horn maintained ground position for the duration of the start of the fight. The ever-dangerous Shamrock would demonstrate his unique combination, strength and ground skill, threatening submissions from underneath Horn. The two would exchange top control throughout the later stages of the fight, and Horn would survive a couple of deep submission attacks from Shamrock, showing off the defensive skill that earned him the nickname Gumby. After a fairly even contest, regulation time would come to an end and overtime would begin. Horn would work hard to take Shamrock to the ground, but would be held off by Shamrock's fence grabbing, something not against the rules of that time in the sport. Somehow, despite the fence grabs, Horn would eventually get Shamrock down. This would spell the beginning of the end, as almost immediately Shamrock would apply a knee bar submission that was too deep for Horn to escape. This, although a loss for Horn, who despite his wealth of experience was only 22 years old at the time, showed that he was capable of taking some of the best MMA fighters of the late 90s into deep waters. Horn was seemingly undeterred by this loss, as over the next 3/4 of a year, he would go on to fight 15 times, collecting a record of 14 wins, 1 loss, and 1 draw, all leading up to what we considered one of the most notable wins of his career, a submission victory over UFC Hall of Famer Chuck Liddell. Liddell, although being Horn's elder by a margin of 7 years, had only 2 MMA bouts at the time compared to Horn's 31. Still, despite the difference in experience, Chuck would prove in the bouts following this one to be one of MMA's elite, winning his next 9 bouts after their contest, beating the likes of the Phenom, Vitor Belfort, Guy Mesner, and Kevin Randleman. The bout between the 2 legends would have Chuck showcasing his notorious sprawl and brawl style while Horn pushed for the takedown. This initially worked successfully for Liddell, while he avoided being dragged into a ground fighting affair, punishing Horn for his grappling heavy style. This was until Horn coaxed Liddell into a ground fight by pulling guard. This enticed Liddell into trying to punish Horn from the top position. Something that played into Horn's game, allowing him to attempt a leg block attack. An attack that seemed close to ending the fight, resulting in Horn achieving top position. The rest of the round would be contested on the ground, as Chuck fought to pry Horn off him from underneath. As the next round began, Chuck's takedown defense was noticeably diminished, clearly worn down from the grappling exchanges of the previous round. Horn would have success early with his ground attack, achieving top position almost immediately, something he would hold on to for the remainder of the bout, culminating in a head and arm submission. Chuck would attempt to escape this deep submission lock by rolling Horn to his back, but by this point, it would be too late. Horn's submission was locked in. When referee Big John McCarthy would go to separate the two at the end of the round, it would be revealed that Chuck Liddell was unconscious. This win, along with a staggering 20-fight win streak, would cement Horn as a force of the late 90s of MMA. After his victory over Chuck, Horn would finish out the 90s with a record of 14-1, capping off his first 4 years of MMA with 37 wins out of 46 fights. And out of those 37 wins, the talented grappler would hold an impressive 23 submission hold victories. Horn would usher in the millennium with 12 fights over the course of the year 2000, winning 8 and losing 4. A year highlighted by fights with legends such as submission ace Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, another UFC Hall of Famer in the Pioneer Wing and a former Pride and UFC heavyweight champion, an Olympic wrestling alternate, Randy Couture, also a UFC Hall of Famer from the Pioneer Wing and a UFC heavyweight and light heavyweight champion. He would lose these bouts by unanimous decision, but would continue to demonstrate that he was a world-class fighter who could go toe-to-toe with anyone on the planet. In 2001, he would compete 9 times with a record of 7-2. Fighting in a rematch with Ricardo Arona, 3-time ADCC world champion, Pride FC staple. This bout would end in majority decision for Arona, as 2 of the world's best grapplers would put their skills on display. Horn, who was often the smaller man in these bouts, was committed to testing his legendary ground game against the absolute top grapplers of early 2000s MMA. By the end of 2001, Horn had competed in 67 fights with a record of 52 wins, 11 losses, and 4 draws. Horn had fought 4 future UFC Hall of Famers and 4 future UFC champions. In 2002, he went undefeated, winning 6 fights, perhaps most notably beating Gilbert Yvel, a former M1 global champion and a UFC and Pride staple. He would follow up a successful 2002 with an outstanding 2003, beating another UFC Hall of Famer, this time in the modern wing, when he took out future UFC light heavyweight champion, Forrest Griffin. This would be a barn burner of a fight. Saw both men engaging in a slugfest from the opening bell, an outstanding but predictable pace when considering the caliber of both practitioners. The bout consisted of an exciting mix of both grappling and striking exchanges, both men showing off impressive mixed martial arts pedigree. Griffin would look to utilize knees from the clinch and smother Horn with his pace and physicality, a strategy consistent with many of Griffin's earlier fights, while Horn worked hard to implement his underrated boxing skill, staying patient on the back foot and looking to land combos on Griffin. Griffin would land the first takedown of the fight, implementing an outside trip takedown. It would be a competitive first round, the momentum of the fight chaotically transitioning between the fighters, both men having their moments as the two showcased excellent scrambling ability. Horn would appear to get the better of these grappling exchanges, but Griffin would not be deterred, eventually working his way back to his feet and even scoring a knockdown against Horn at around the halfway mark of the first round. The remainder of the round would take place primarily on the ground, with both men having moments of success. As the second round began, the momentum of Griffin's mid-round knockdown would not continue, as Horn would find himself landing combos and eventually settling into top position, a position in which he held for the better part of 2 minutes until the referee stood them up. This is when Horn threw a devastating head kick that was just enough to finish the legend, Forrest Griffin. Along with this win, Horn would also secure a win over the aforementioned Travis Bolt by TKO corner stoppage, avenging the 2 draws they'd fought to earlier in their careers. This, accompanied by a win over ADCC Hall of Famer and UFC and Pride star Dean Lister, and a loss to future Strikeforce light heavyweight champion Renato Sobral, helped to build the legacy of Jeremy Horn even further. Horn, who had not yet reached the age of 30, had already compiled a who's who's list of talent to his resume. 2004 would see him defeat multiple-time UFC title challenger Chael Sonnen, not once, but twice. Chael would prove to be a worthy opponent in both fights, but Horn's edge on experience would serve him well, winning the first bout due to a cut and submitting Chael in their second contest, which had Chael winning until he was caught in a guillotine choke off of a takedown attempt. 2004 is also the year in which he would take on his 6th UFC Hall of Famer, when he fought arguably the greatest MMA fighter of all time, Anderson the Spider Silva. Horn's grappling heavy attack presented problems for Silva during the early stages of the fight, landing a big slam in the first minute and controlling top position for the majority of the opening round. To Silva's credit, the Spider remained active off of his back, threatening submissions, landing punches from underneath. In the final minute of the first round, the referee would decide to intervene, standing the 2 up. Once back to the feet, as many of you might have guessed, this fight would turn into a classic striker versus grappler matchup, seeing Silva throw offense at blistering speeds while parrying and evading Horn's strikes, seemingly with ease. As the second round began, Horn would show that he could strike too, landing a nice head kick on the GOAT. Still, this round would be more of the same, as Silva showcased his devastating striking, while Horn looked to land a takedown. Takedown he would find with 2 minutes left in the round. Unfortunately for Horn, he would only be given a little over a minute to work on the ground before the referee would again stand the 2 back to the feet. As the third round began, we would see Silva keeping to the outside, looking to utilize quick, straight punches. This would be the story for the majority of the third round, as we would see Silva coast his way to a decision victory. This fight would showcase Horn's insane durability as he stood toe-to-toe with one of the greatest strikers to ever do it. Horn would finish 2004 with a total of 7 fights with 6 victories. An amazing year when coupled with the fact that up until this point of his career, Horn had been in 90 fights with only 13 losses, winning at a rate of 80%. Horn had yet to be KO'd in his career, an insane statistic when considering the staggering amount of cage time he had accumulated up until that point. In 2005, although being a good year for Horn, winning 5 of 6 fights, would be a year that changed him. As most fans of MMA know, even the most durable of warriors have damaged thresholds, and it seems that this would be a year that Horn would come up against his threshold, exposed in a second attempt for the light heavyweight title in a highly anticipated rematch with Chuck the Iceman Liddell. The rematch would take place 6 years after the initial bout. The fight would open up with good exchanges from both men, seeing Chuck go to work with his classic unorthodox power punching style, while Horn looked to counter with traditional crisp boxing. The two would be evenly matched until the 3-minute mark of the first round, where a trademark right hand from Chuck Liddell would shift the momentum and send Horn to the canvas. Horn, the ever-crafty veteran, would do what he had to survive, using calculated decision-making to make it out of the first round. The second round would be more of the same, with the two having a competitive boxing match until Chuck would again find Horn with a solid right hand. The right hand that would find Horn at around 15 seconds before the midway point of the round, again sending Horn to the canvas. Horn would again show why he had not been KO'd in over 90 fights, surviving the onslaught, making it back to his feet to continue to box with Chuck for the remainder of the round. Horn came into the third round looking more alert and pushing the pace, noticeably implementing more kicks than in the previous rounds. Horn's head movement improved as Chuck seemed to have slowed down. Still, even with looming fatigue, Liddell's right hand remained a consistent threat. This round would be Horn's best round of the fight, with both men landing 9 significant strikes, while Horn being the more efficient, landing at 40% compared to Chuck's 23%. The fourth round would be the last round of the fight, as we would see Horn take another devastating right hand, again at the halfway mark of the round. Horn would take the stoppage of the fight into his own hands, chillingly telling the referee that he cannot see, and requesting that the fight be stopped. A terrifying thing to see any fighter request a fight to be stopped due to the state of their health. Made even more disturbing when considering the fact this would mark the first time Horn had been finished by strikes in 95 bouts. Following his first TKO loss, Horn would bounce back less than 3 months later, winning by unanimous decision against Trevor Prangley. 2006 is when you can start to see a significant slowdown from the battle-tested Horn, fought only twice this year, defeating Chael Sonnen for a third time and losing to Matt Lynn. In 2007, he fought 3 times, going 2-1, with the notable win over future Ultimate Fighter winner and UFC legend, Court McGee. 2008, he lost twice in formidable matchups, one in a rematch with Dean Lister and one to UFC vet, future Strikeforce champion, Nate the Great Marquardt. 2009, Horn had a bounce-back year, winning 3 times and losing only once, the notorious Predator Rasmir Palhares by unanimous decision. In 2010, Horn fought 5 times, going 4-1, with a win over fellow UFC vet Sean Salmon and an appearance on the famous MMA promotion Bellator. Now past the age of 35, and 111 fights into his MMA career. Horn has fought 8 times since 2011, holding a record over that time period of 5 wins, 2 losses, and 1 no contest. Horn fought his last MMA fight as recently as 2020, competing at the ripe age of 44 years old. Over the course of me compiling the information for this docuseries, I have developed a deep admiration for Horn's willingness to sacrifice for the sport of mixed martial arts. Mixed martial arts is a sport filled with those who give their mind, body, and spirit to their art. And within this ecosystem, Jeremy went above and beyond. Committing over 2 decades to being the best he can be is inspiring, and his warrior spirit is an excellent testament to the beauty of the human mind. Over the course of his first 4 years of MMA competition, Horn compiled a record of 34 wins, 4 losses, 4 draws, pacing of fights that is unprecedented in MMA today. For the first 9 years of his MMA career, he fought at a pace of 10 fights a year, winning at an 80% clip and fighting 5 future UFC Hall of Famers, 3 future UFC champions, 2 current UFC champions, a future Strikeforce champion, and a laundry list of staple fighters from the early days of MMA. Abe suffered a steep decline towards the later stages of his career, particularly after his first KO loss handed to him by the legend Chuck Liddell, his 95th mixed martial arts bout. Still, he would finish out his career with 16 wins and 8 losses. A respectable record, but one that is not on par with the legendary fighting skill and ability shown prior to that loss. As uncomfortable as it may be to watch an all-time great fight past their prime, it must always be kept in the back of an MMA fan's mind that a fighter's willingness to fight in the face of adversity is why we love him so much. Jeremy Horn had many moments throughout his career in which he was denied hard-fought moments that would no doubt contribute to his legacy. But perhaps what defines his legacy the best is how he dealt with those setbacks.
Thank you very much, Jeff. You were able to bring him into your world, as you say, with your strong jiu-jitsu background, Jeremy.
Yeah, it was tough getting him there, but I got him.
Yeah. What does this mean to you, this victory? It's your first in the UFC.
Hopefully, it's the end of my run of bad luck in the UFC. I have 4 losses and 2 of them were here, so hopefully that'll be the last of them.
You know, Jeremy, you said to me earlier, you said you were very disappointed in your performance in Brazil. What did you do in training perhaps differently since that disappointment to come out so strong tonight?
I did a lot of boxing, a lot of kickboxing. Got kicked around a lot so that I could be more comfortable on my feet, which was my big flaw. I'm too anxious to take people down, and I make mistakes a lot in doing so. So I figured if I was a little more comfortable on my feet, it would work better for my takedowns.
You've worked hard in the weight room. You've put on an incredible physique. You have improved your strength. In fact, Pat Miletich was teasing you the other night at the fighters meeting saying, yeah, we're going to turn this young man into a fighter.
Someday. I think that was a little bit of a problem tonight. Spent too much time in the gym, not enough time on the mat. I got a little gassed. Doesn't usually happen, but it won't happen again.
You know, Jeremy, it's very interesting. You told us a couple of fights ago that you feel like you've reached at top 20% of your fighting potential. Now this is a few months and a couple of fights later. At what ranking percentage of your potential are you at now?
I don't know, not much more past that. I still got a long way to go.
Impressive nonetheless.
Thank you.
Jeremy Horn again gets the win, his first win inside the octagon, and he does it with the choke of his opponent. He learned a lot from his boss, Pat Miletich. Jeff?